Boxing Day, the 26th of December, after a series of Christmas lunches that my mother had, and she thought she had a severe case of indigestion and realised that she was in labour, probably well into it, and Barry was her second child, so it was a little bit of familiarity with the process, but still he wasn't due until February. So he was born about 8 weeks prem, and so that was a little bit of a shock for everybody. So mum's indigestion turned into a little baby boy, and we come from a country town in New South Wales, and so when he was born, preemie babies in those days were pretty touch and go anyway, in the early 60s, 1962. So when he was born, the doctors said, yes, he's a preemie baby, it's complicated, and realised pretty much straight away that he was different looking, and was told mum and dad that he was probably going to die, and put him in the nursery for babies, and mum and dad never got to see him, not allowed to touch him, and the doctor came back and told mum that they were feeding him in the nursery, and that she wouldn't need to see the baby, and mum just accepted that until about a day or so later, a friend of mum's who was one of the midwives there came and told mum that there was something wrong with the baby, and that she had been sneaking feeds because the doctor had said to all the nursing staff not to feed him and to let him die, and so that she'd been sneaking feeds to him during that time, and that was probably very distressing for a new mum to hear, but also that there was something wrong with him, not just being prem. And so that continued for about a week, and then my brother Barry got a staph infection. He and another baby in the nursery got a staph infection, and they were transported by ambulance to Sydney. And mum and dad would often talk about the driving behind the ambulance all the way from the country town in Goulburn, where we came from, to Sydney, pulling up behind the ambulance, and the doctor and the nurse getting the babies out and saying to mum, here's your baby, and mum had never touched him, hadn't even really seen him to that point in time, and that would have been really awful for her. I think she's been handed this baby, transported to Sydney, effectively to die, I suspect, and not having had any contact with him, physical contact, since he was born. And that was the first time mum touched him, first time she got to nurse him, first time she got to cuddle him, and then he was whisked away for treatment, and then the other baby was a full-term healthy baby until the baby got the staph infection. That baby died, and Barry fought tooth and nail and survived. Then they started talking to mum and dad about him having something wrong with him, and so he went on to have a chromosomal analysis done, probably one of the first children in Australia perhaps to have a chromosomal analysis done, and it had to be sent to the States for analysis. They brought this baby home, and by all accounts just got on with it, and then it was time to get the results of the chromosomal analysis, so mum and dad drive to Sydney to get the results, to be told that he had Down syndrome, trisomy 21, and that they should have no problems having more children, which was pretty good because I was now in utero, and so that was a relief for them, I guess. And so I was born after Barry, 18 months after he was born. And I think even there was a lot of pressure on mum and dad to institutionalise him and not to have him at home, from the medical fraternity, from families and from the community. And but they brought him home, and he was part of our family. He was my older brother, but he was a skinny, wiry kid and was fairly active, but he suffered really constantly with ear infections, and by which stage mum was really a little bit reticent for any of us to go to the doctor, and in particular Barry. So he would have ear infections, and he suffered, and it was awful as a little kid to watch, and I would imagine awful as a parent to be party to, knowing that her other kids could have antibiotics but not him. So that was awful. And then as the years went on, his hearing deteriorated, and probably we didn't really notice that until he was in his mid-teens, and realised that his speech and language had also deteriorated, and from the ear infections. And I was, I think probably he would have been about 16 or so, there was an attempt for him to have a hearing assessment in Townsville, and it never happened. And every year it'd be next year, next year, next year. He would have been about 23, so he had his hearing checked and was found to be profoundly deaf and got his first set of bone conductor hearing aids. But that's a long time to wait, and a lot of language lost and a lot of time lost with family. And he was a very chatty, he's probably the most extroverted person in our family, and that's a lot of time not to hear things and to be part of our family life and friends, and he really enjoyed hearing planes again, and music, because he loved music. So he had years of not hearing his favourite tunes, but when he got his hearing aids, that was great for him. So Barry's health became very complicated around the time he was 16, and he was seeing lots and lots of various doctors, and Mum and Dad were told that nothing could be done, nothing could be done, nothing could be done. And nothing could be done is really not sufficient, because 16, 17, 18, right through until his mid-20s, blood work would come and go, because that's what doctors would ask for. And it wasn't until they moved to Brisbane and got a new doctor, and the doctor was looking at his blood results over many years and realised that he had hypothyroidism that had not been treated. And that's just a matter of taking a tablet. For Barry, that was, I can't imagine how unwell he must have felt. And he didn't need to be. For Barry, he had, as I said, very complex health issues that became very apparent as when he was about 16. And we were told that he had a particular cardiac episode at school, and we got told that he only probably had a month to live. And so, nothing can be done or should be done, because it was, he was 16, he had Down syndrome. I'm 14, nearly 15, and I've got no really idea of what that meant, except for my brother was going to die next month, which was a little bit confronting, but he didn't die until he was 47. And so this idea of nothing could be done continued for for decades. And whenever you'd go to a new specialist, they would look, and it was this, well, if we'd seen him 3 months ago or 3 years ago or 6 months ago or 6 years ago, we could have done X, Y, Z. But now we've gotten into the state we're in, nothing really can happen. And that's the message that we got all the way through his adult life. He had cataracts, and that's a surgical procedure that anybody I know who has had a cataract, except for my brother, can have surgery to have their cataracts removed. But if you leave a cataract for a very long time, which happened in his case, he's now blind because of the cataracts. That's actually a complicated surgical procedure now that actually is much more difficult to treat than when it first got identified. It would have been a much simpler procedure. So, if you leave something so late that it can't be done, of course nothing can be done. But lots of times I think Barry experienced a level of indifference around the possibilities. He missed things because in the early days he couldn't hear it, and then he went blind, so then he couldn't see it. So he missed a lot of family life and a lot of community life. He loved music. He loved to dance. He loved going out and doing things. So, those things are all cut short when you're not well. So, he loved line dancing. So you can only do a line dance for 3 to 5 minutes before he'd need to have a rest, as opposed to everybody else 3 to 5 hours. He also had a severe hernia that was very, very, very large, and that impacted on his well-being as well. So he self-managed that for many, 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 many years, and that restricted his movement as well, because when the hernia was really particularly bad, he could hardly walk, and so that was really difficult for him. And and the pain, that he was in a lot of pain with his heart, and he was in a lot of pain with his hernia. So he suffered, and getting pain relief for him was particularly difficult, a level of pain relief that was adequate, and because people have attitudes around pain relief anyway, but attitudes around somebody with an intellectual disability requiring pain relief, which seems crazy, but people with intellectual disability feel pain just as much as other people without an intellectual disability. And that was hard to negotiate and navigate and advocate around. Barry started losing his teeth probably in his early 20s, and that part of that was poor oral health care, but also poor medical care that caused his teeth to fall out and the pain that came with that. And the impact of that was quite substantial, and finding a dentist who would treat him was particularly difficult. And then we ended up seeing an oral surgeon who insisted that Barry had to have a general anaesthetic for him to even look at Barry's mouth. And I couldn't understand why that would need to happen, and I was explained that people like him bite. And I kind of went, well, what do you mean? People like him? People with sore teeth? People with sore gums? No, people like him with Down syndrome are biters. And I'm thinking, well, I don't think Barry's ever bitten anybody that I could remember, so why would he start biting this oral surgeon? And that was really complicated because this surgeon was insisting on a general anaesthetic, and the one thing we were told that a general anaesthetic would compromise Barry's heart health almost irretrievably, and he was unwilling to treat Barry without a general anaesthetic. So then we had to move on and find somebody else who was prepared to treat Barry. But that's time, and that's another 1 month, 2 months, 3 months of time waiting, looking, finding someone to look after, treat and care for him. And as a result of that, Barry lost all his teeth. And that had an enormous impact on his diet. So it had an impact on his health, had an enormous impact on how he perceived himself. He was now a man with no teeth, and that impacted on his self-esteem, impacted on his speech, impacted on his social engagement, had enormous impacts, and much more than just having healthy gums and healthy teeth, which I believe all could have been avoided. He was very passionate about the arts. He loved performing arts, he loved visual arts, he loved painting, he loved music, he loved performing, and he was in a performance group. He won art competitions for his paintings. He really loved to paint, and that was really a very joyful pastime for him. Absolutely passionate about rugby league. Not long before he died, weeks before he died actually, at the beginning of the football season, he got to go and see his beloved Cowboys play the Broncos at Suncorp, and that's my most favourite picture of him. He was never happier.